For 11 months, Dolly Parton stood in front of a camera and told her fans the truth. Kidney stones, a little dizziness, grief that was wearing her down. Every single thing she said checked out. And every single time she left out the one word that would have changed how everyone listening understood everything else she'd just said. She had cancer, confirmed now by her own estate, in a statement calling it a brief battle that ended at Nashville's Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center. She never said the word publicly, not once, not in a year of health updates, not even at the very end. The question worth asking isn't whether she was honest. By every available account, she was. The question is why a woman who spent 60 years building her entire identity around warmth and openness chose, in the one chapter of her life that mattered most, to keep her own audience one careful step removed from the truth. Start with what she actually said, because the answer isn't hiding in what she concealed, it's hiding in what she chose to reveal instead. In September 2025, she postponed a Las Vegas residency, telling fans she was dealing with health challenges and that her doctors said she needed a few procedures. That sentence is doing precise work. It tells the truth. It also guides the listener toward an entirely wrong conclusion, because nobody hears the phrase "a few procedures" from an 80-year-old woman and thinks cancer treatment. They think something manageable, something an older person deals with and moves past. She wasn't lying. She was choosing which true thing to say. A month later, the story nearly slipped out of her control entirely, and watching how she responded tells you more about her instincts than almost anything else in this timeline. Her sister, Frida Parton, posted publicly asking fans to pray for Dolly, saying she hadn't been feeling her best. Frida wasn't managing a narrative. She was scared for her sister, the way any sibling would be, and she said so without any of the careful construction Dolly had been applying to her own statements. The very next day, Dolly released her own video. She said she knew people were starting to think she was sicker than she actually was. Think about what that sentence required her to do. She had to acknowledge her sister's fear without confirming what that fear was actually about, while sounding reassuring enough that the story would die down rather than spread. That's not an easy thing to pull off in real time, on camera, while genuinely fighting cancer. She did it anyway. By March 2026, at the opening of her own theme park, something shifted, and it's worth noticing exactly how much she let through in that moment, because it's the closest she ever came to saying it outright. She told the crowd she'd been worn down and worn out, and tied it explicitly to grief over her husband, Carl Dean, who died the previous spring after nearly 60 years of marriage. She said she was working to rebuild herself spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Every word of that is true. Grief is exhausting, and losing a 60-year partner at 80 years old is exactly the kind of thing that could wear a person down in precisely the way she described. It's also, now, impossible not to read physically, as carrying weight she never fully explained. She gave her audience a real and sufficient reason for her exhaustion. It just wasn't the only reason. Then came May 2026, and this is the moment worth sitting with longest, because it's as close as she ever got to full disclosure, and the fact that she stopped exactly where she did tells you something specific about where her line actually sat. She named a real condition, kidney stones, described in her own words as so persistent that doctors dug more of them out of her in a year than a rock quarry back home in Tennessee. She said her immune system and digestive system had been out of whack for 2 to 3 years, and that she and her doctors were working to rebuild both. That's an extraordinary amount of specific, verifiable medical detail for a woman supposedly guarding a secret. She wasn't avoiding the subject of her health. She was standing directly inside it, describing real symptoms in vivid, precise language. She simply never connected those symptoms to the disease that had been causing them, and in a strange way, that makes the omission harder to explain than if she'd said nothing at all. Silence would have been simple evasion. What she actually did was closer to describing every room in a house except the one where the fire started. We now know, from reporting that surfaced only after her death, that she'd been hospitalized the Friday before she died for kidney and autoimmune issues, the exact two systems she'd been publicly discussing for months. Every piece of what she told her fans was accurate. What she withheld wasn't a fabrication. It was a single unifying word that would have made all of those individual true statements suddenly cohere into one much more serious picture. Kidney stones on their own sound like an inconvenience. Kidney stones, as a documented symptom of an underlying cancer, sound like something else entirely. She gave her audience every piece of the puzzle except the one that would have let them see the whole image. So why? Start with who she'd spent her whole life being, because the answer isn't really about this diagnosis specifically. It's about a pattern she'd been running for 60 years, applied one final time to the hardest material she'd ever faced. Dolly Parton built her career on an almost unmatched degree of control. She wrote her own songs and kept ownership of the publishing rights at a time when almost nobody in Nashville did that, understanding decades before it was standard practice that owning your own material meant owning your own story. She built Dollywood in her own hometown region on her own terms, rather than letting a larger entertainment company absorb her name and dilute it. She turned down a Kennedy Center honor the first time it was offered, and only accepted years later on a timeline that suited her. Every major decision of her public life carries the same signature. She let people in exactly as far as she chose, wrapped inside a persona so warm and unguarded seeming that almost nobody noticed how deliberately that access was being managed. A cancer diagnosis takes control away from a person in almost every dimension there is. It dictates your schedule, your body, your energy, your future, often without asking. For a woman who had spent 6 decades making sure that nothing about her public story happened without her deciding it should, choosing exactly how much of the diagnosis to share, and exactly when, may have been one of the only forms of control still fully available to her. She couldn't control the cancer. She could control the sentence she used to describe its side effects. She used that control the same way she'd used it her entire career, not to deceive, but to decide. There's also a simpler, more human possibility sitting alongside that one, and it doesn't require any strategic explanation at all. She had just lost her husband of nearly 60 years. Grief of that scale can make a diagnosis feel like something a person genuinely isn't ready to hand over to the world yet, not out of calculation, but because there's only so much a person can carry in public at once. Telling millions of fans, "I have cancer," invites a specific kind of collective mourning to begin immediately, in real time, while she was still trying to live whatever life she had left. Saying, "I have kidney stones and I'm a little worn out," let her keep touring when she could, keep showing up at Dollywood, keep being exactly who she'd always been for just a little while longer, without every single public appearance becoming a referendum on how much time was left. That's not deception. That might be the most human decision available to a person facing what she was facing. Go back to her sister's Facebook post one more time, the moment the whole careful structure nearly cracked. Frida wasn't performing anything. She was just frightened, the way any sister would be, and she said so plainly, the way people who aren't managing a public image tend to. And Dolly's response the next day, calm, warm, gently amused at the alarm, wasn't a denial of what her sister feared. It was a redirection, delivered with enough warmth that almost nobody watching thought to ask what exactly was being redirected away from. That instinct held for 10 more months through a theme park opening, through a specific and detailed health disclosure that still somehow left out the one word that mattered most, through a final absence explained as simple dizziness and dehydration. She never told the public she had cancer, and now that the word is finally out, it doesn't actually undo anything she said while she was alive. Every sentence still holds up. She just spent the last year of her life deciding, the way she'd decided almost everything else for 6 decades, exactly how much of her story belonged to the people watching, and exactly how much was allowed to stay hers alone, right up until the very end. Whatever her reasons and whichever explanation feels closest to the truth, it doesn't change what she actually gave the world for 60 years. A voice and a songbook that shaped country music for generations. A theme park that became the economic heartbeat of an entire region she never stopped calling home. A literacy program that put millions of free books into children's hands, quietly, without ever needing the credit. She spent a lifetime deciding exactly what she wanted to share with us, and what she chose to share again and again was generosity. Our thoughts are with her family, her sisters and brothers, her nephew Brian, and everyone who loved her during an incredibly difficult time. Rest easy, Dolly.